Hi everybody, welcome to episode 3 of Transforming the World Together. Today we'll be talking about the right to education and also the impact that the COVID pandemic has had on education. So today we're commemorating International Day of Education, which is held on the 24th of January annually. In 2018, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution in celebration of the role of education for bringing global peace and sustainable development. This year's theme is Recover and Revitalize Education for the COVID-19 Generation. The global pandemic has shown us just how unprepared we were to adapt to the shift from traditional learning to a more digitalized and distance learning approach. The pandemic has forced a massive shift away from learning and teaching in traditional settings with actual physical interaction. And this is a major problem for poorer children and poorer communities globally, who often rely on physical settings for education, and also sometimes it's the children's only food or meal for the day. And it becomes really difficult to change and adapt to this big shift. During times of confinement and quarantine, children can face multiple forms of abuse and neglect and even violence, and statistically we've seen this on a global scale. There's also an issue of crowded conditions and a general lack of resources, particularly digital devices and connectivity. And these are problems that we need to tackle now. We shouldn't be waiting for more to happen before we start tackling these issues. Now I'm going to hand over to Charlene Sunkel, who's going to talk about the human rights aspect of education. Charlene, over to you.
Education is a basic human right. If you look at the Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26 specifically stipulates that education is a human right, and it actually further calls for free and compulsory elementary education. If we look at the Convention on the Rights of the Child, that specifically obligates countries to make higher education more accessible and accessible to all. The United Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities also calls for inclusive education, and that includes at all levels from preschool, primary school, secondary, tertiary, vocational, and even long-time learning. It is important to know that the education system must provide those with disabilities, and that includes people with psychosocial disabilities or children with psychosocial disabilities, with reasonable accommodation, so that they are able to kind of perform at an optimal level. Apart from these conventions that I just mentioned, the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically goal number 4, focuses on education, and it recognizes that education enables upward socioeconomic mobility, and it is key to eliminating or reducing poverty. So education in itself is critical to achieve pretty much all of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
We would like to introduce you now to Sandra Ferreira, who's an educator and also who serves on our Country Executive Committee representing South Africa.
Hi. Firstly, I'd like to thank Charlene and Claudia for inviting me to be part of this month's episode. As we observe International Day of Education, I'd like to share one of my favorite quotes by Nelson Mandela on education. He said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world. The power of education extends beyond the development of skills we need for economic success. It can contribute to nation building and reconciliation. Very powerful and valuable indeed."
Okay, Sandra, so with the global pandemic and the changing context, how important is it for education institutions and government to ensure that everybody has reasonable access to knowledge and education?
I think when we look at the role that governments and educational institutions need to play with regards to access to resources and information, we need to take a step back and look at the primary needs. These needs include physiological, safety, and in my opinion, emotional needs also need to be reprioritized. In countries such as South Africa, unfortunately, many of our children don't have access to primary services. as well as their needs. Some don't have food, clothing, shelter, and at the moment, obviously, of the utmost importance is access to health. Once these fundamentals have been put in place effectively, then from there we can look at resources. In the age that we live in, with insurmountable information online, access to internet is vital. I have to point out responsible access when it comes to children as well. If we look locally and we look at South Africa at the moment, we have data costs that are the 4th highest in the world. This is not only a government issue, but also a corporate issue. When we look at education holistically, although the governments and educational institutions do carry a lot of responsibility, I don't think we can ignore the role of teachers, parents, communities, anyone that interacts with children, basically. I think it's our social responsibility to encourage a love of learning and to instill a sense of empathy amongst learners and children. Once they are equipped with these tools, they can positively affect change and growth in their lives.
Another question that we have for you, and it's twofold. So the first thing would be, the relationship between a student and a teacher is essential to the educational process and also towards human development in general. From your experience, how do you think the dynamic between a student and an educator has changed over the years, and how do you think COVID has potentially impacted this further?
The relationship between a teacher and a student has definitely evolved over the years. If we think back to the origins of formal education, a teacher's role was simply to be a service provider. As the world has changed and family dynamics have changed too, we see a lot more of single-parent households as well as divorced families, etc. With this, the emotional needs of children often fall to the teacher, their closest ally, someone that they trust. During this pandemic, it has become increasingly difficult to connect on a human level, not just throughout schools, but just in general globally, and this we are aware of. I think it's important for teachers who are teaching online to still take the time to connect with each individual scholar or student that they have, to take the time to listen and understand as best as they can, as they are expected to listen to us.
So for our next question, so you're currently working with us at the Peer Network on embedding mental health into school curriculums. Can you tell us more about this project, why you chose the project, and what do you aim to achieve through its implementation?
Last year, I enrolled in a postgrad course called Embedding Mental Health into the School Curriculum. Through this course, I was introduced to many things, but one of the things that really stuck out to me was a peer education program which is offered at schools, secondary schools primarily. Although it's not a new program and it is used effectively in countries such as the United Kingdom and the USA, it is something that hasn't touched ground yet here in Africa, or South Africa specifically. I think the benefits of this program are immense from an awareness and a destigmatization point of view, not only for the scholars, but those around them. Educating children on mental health conditions empowers them. It's also interesting to note that 1 in 4 children will develop mental health issues before the age of 14. That's why I think early intervention is key when it comes to mental health. Also, changing the narrative and changing the discussion within schools will effect change. So although we're not reinventing the wheel, we're just changing gears and making it common ground to speak about mental health.
Now for our last question. Why do you think the Global Mental Health Peer Network can help mobilize your efforts for improved education settings and its related policies and school practices as it relates to mental health?
I think working with an organization such as the Global Mental Health Peer Network, informing educational policies is of the utmost importance. Having an organization with members who all have lived experience with mental health conditions, as well as worlds of knowledge in other fields of expertise, creates an essence of relatability when forming policies. Not only that, but within a schooling environment and in general, a sense of community and a sense of belonging is also a priority that needs to be really, really looked at. I think the potential of this project is phenomenal, and as a teacher, a philosophy that I've had for many years is I might not impact all of them, but if I can help one on the road, then I've done my job for the day. So yes, I think this is a great platform and a great project to move forward with.
Well, thank you to everybody that's been watching this episode. I feel it's something that's really important to us. And just to wrap up on what we spoke about, I think it's really important that we realize that the time is now to make changes. The time to power education by stepping up with collaboration is now. Bringing together all different stakeholders, public, private, and government, as well as our educators around the world. If we could all come together and really try and make a difference. If you liked what you saw today and enjoyed our episode, please give us a thumbs up, like and subscribe, and we will see you guys soon.